A shroud of darkness blankets the world. Smoke and brimstone spews from the yawning gates of Inferno, enveloping the land, where people have abandoned God and openly wage war against his creation. It's a grim reality that a full third of humanity has bent its knee before the idols of hell. The main satanic military force on Earth are the Heretic Legions, raised from among these citizens of the damned.
Trench Crusade has burst onto the tabletop scene with a bang, $3.3 million bang. Because that's how much their Kickstarter made. It sort of challenges even the darkest moments of what we see in other settings, and it makes the grimdark world of Warhammer 40k feel like an utopia. After the fall of Jerusalem in the year 1099, a group of Templars find a demonic artifact buried deep below the holy city. The artifact instantly corrupts their minds and they open the gates to hell. And 800 years later, humanity still struggles for survival. I've been reading through the lore primer you can get for free online. I'll leave a link in the description, and each of these factions is completely bonkers and has their own appeal. But for some reason, I'm always drawn towards the truly bad guys, especially in this case, the Heretic Legion, because these guys are not demons. Well, not all of them, but the bulk of them are not spawned by hell. They choose to serve evil. And in my mind, that makes them the ultimate bad guys in this setting. And that also makes them the perfect candidates for my first warband. Plus they have witches that materialize bombs made in hell out of thin air that they furiously hurl at you. Doesn't get any better than that. So while I build the backbone of my future Heretic Legion force in this video, let's dive into what Trench Crusade is and why it has taken the tabletop world by storm.
But first, a word from our sponsor.
Surfshark VPN is an app that virtually places your device in another spot in more than 100 available countries across the globe. I'm tired of paying for online streaming services because most of the time you can't even watch half of the advertised content because it's geo-restricted to certain countries only. Surfshark lets you bypass these restrictions with a simple mouse click and stream your favorite shows and movies like you're actually there. You know, I kinda wanted to rewatch that really cool movie called Oppenheimer, but it's not available on Netflix in my country. However, by just switching my location from Austria to Australia, boom, I have become Death, the destroyer of worlds. Crikey mate, fair dinkum. And did you know that websites usually show you prices based on your geolocation or device? Surfshark helps you get the best deals when shopping online for everyday products or when buying your next plane ticket, a hotel room or rental. No more restrictions or censorship based on your location. But that's not even the biggest benefit of using Surfshark. It also protects you from all kinds of outside threats to your devices with its built-in antivirus software, data encryption, so you're safe when browsing in public Wi-Fi or mobile connections, and it protects you from data breaches and phishing attempts or other malware that can get your information or identity stolen. And the good news is Surfshark offers a 30-day money-back guarantee, so there's no risk involved whatsoever. You can effectively just try it for free on an unlimited amount of devices, and if you don't like it, full refund. So don't hesitate. Follow the link in the description and use my code Travarian4 to get a massive discount and 4 months extra on top for free. Obviously, you can print all of the units, and I did print these more expensive elite troops because I want to keep the vibe and the style of the faction, and there's no way that I'm going to scratch build all of these units. But with everything I do, I also want to add a personal touch and give it my own little twist, because this is my warband. There are many warbands like it, but this is mine. The bulk of this conversion would come mainly from the Krieg Command Squad, and I've been criticizing Games Workshop a lot lately for some of their creative decisions, but as a miniature designer myself, I gotta say this set really is amazing, and I'll tell you why once we get to it. But this would be the perfect base for my Heretic Legion troops, because looking at the Sculpts, their poses and the elements they have are really close to what I imagine them to look like, and one of these elements was a banner. And I know that banners are not traditionally associated with skirmish games, but I looked at the Trench Crusade accessory STL packages and there are some banner options in there. Also, it just offers so much customization potential, doing a little freehand to personalize these troops even further. And if we can agree on anything, then that I'm a bit of a banner and freehand nut. So what did you expect? I wanted to start with the banner bearer right away. So I cut and scraped off the sculpted Krieg iconography with my hobby knife, but for the sake of my thumb, I quickly switched to these ceramic milling bits. They apparently are used for nail art, but they work really well with Games Workshop plastic, as they do not really eat into it and it doesn't make it fray. The only downside is all of that plastic dust that just gets everywhere. And once the banner was thin enough and relatively even, I hit it with a low grit sandpaper sponge to get rid of any bumps and to make the folds softer and a little more flowy. And then I wet sanded everything smooth with this 1000 grit paper. The original banner was a little longer than high, but I preferred a more square frame as I felt like it would work better with the composition and the pose of the mini. Also, I thought this would not be like a majestic coat of arms, but rather a piece of rugged and weathered cloth turned into a flag more than anything. And speaking of weathering, I had this idea in mind where the cloth would decay in a certain way that would leave round holes. Maybe the edges get burned in a certain way, or you name it. I really wasn't after anything realistic here. I just wanted it to look cool. So I started to use my ceramic bits and it worked somewhat okay for these bigger shapes, but there's not a lot of structure here at the top of the bits that could take off material. So it's not that easy to dig into the plastic. So I tried a few other tools instead, like drill bits of various diameters, and that worked for cutting the holes, but for the bulk, the crater-like structure I wanted, I switched back to a metal milling bit to create some controlled chaos pattern. Compared to the ceramic tools, this one ate into the plastic hard, so I had to brace my hands against the banner to have better control and not to accidentally slip and take away too much. And once the structure was done, I put in some final small details and punched really tiny holes with this 0.5 mm drill. A fun little detail, whenever I have some fraying plastic, for example, when cleaning mold lines or carving into plastic with suboptimal tools, wiping a hard toothbrush over the structure has a really cool smoothing effect. My reference would be this trooper artwork done by none other than Mike Francina, a concept artist for Runic Games, Path of Exile, Magic the Gathering, and Blizzard Entertainment. The Trench Crusade is basically his brainchild. The art existed first, and the lore and the rules were fleshed out around Mike's creative vision. As you can see, the Legionnaires don't look that much different from Krieg troops, but there's a few distinct differences. First of all, they do not have these long coats, so I started cutting down that part, smoothing out the top areas that I would keep, and then deciding on the length of the jacket and cutting away the rest. That also means I had to decide on whether to resculpt the leg part, so the pants and the bandages around the lower legs, or to simply carve them from plastic, and I decided on the later, using the features that were still there as a guide, carving it with a blade, and smoothing everything out with my toothbrush and sandpaper. The other very distinct feature of the Legionnaires is the armor that has been forged in the fires of hell. As much as the armor of the followers of the Divine is imbued by angelic powers, the armors of the Heretic Legions are made from metals found in the Tartarus, making them able to withstand hails of bullets, unlike any other earthly armor would. But this protection comes at a price, because wearing them burns both body and soul. They're forged into archaic shapes, etched with heretic symbols, and corroded in unearthly ways. I had to get rid of a lot of features and gradually had to carve away material to make space for the heretic armor in the upper body area. And I wanted that particular breastplate look with the sloping part on the lower end, so I had to make room for that too. I got rid of most other armor parts, for example on shoulders, because I wanted to stay closer to the artwork that has sleeker shoulders. And one problem I faced was the oversized weapons that 40k uses. It always irked me, but you know, in the context of Space Marines hauling f***ing artillery-sized guns around, I guess it's not that big of a problem. But when it is regular infantry models, you just realize how silly it is. Especially when you compare them to more proportioned approaches, which means basically every other gaming system. I'm kinda bummed I only realized that there's accessory and weapon packs for most Trench Crusade factions available after I was already done with most of my troopers. But it's good that there's more 2-scale rifles and submachine guns available. In any case, with some tweaking, I think the Krieg weapons ended up looking okay. Slimming down most of the barrels as much as possible and getting rid of the more 40k icons went a long way. I knew I wanted a more open pose with the arm more drawn back into the shoulder blade, which means I had to cut the angles of the individual pieces a bit different. And after gluing them together and dry fitting the banner, I filled the gap in the front, making it look like the uniform gets stretched a bit in that area. Looking at the art again, the pants looked a bit more like breeches, reminiscent, probably not by accident, of the Wehrmacht uniforms. So I bolstered these parts with some putty and added some folds in the process to add the notion of movement. Building this particular breastplate took a while, mainly because I had to build the individual parts step by step, letting each stage mostly cure before I moved on to the next layer on top of the previous one. Now I had to make sure to get the angles right in the lower outline, and I wanted the angles in the middle to be pronounced because that adds a certain archaic and menacing look. Most of the world of Trench Crusade was laid out by Mike Francina in 2016, and soon he teamed up with James Sharif to bring some of these concepts to life in actual physical miniatures. And then, in another stroke of genius, they added none other than the game designer of Mordheim and creator of probably the best Warhammer rule set ever, 6th edition, Tuomas Pirinen, to the team to create the rules for the game. And he's on record saying that he wanted a game that can be learned by looking at 2 pages for 2 minutes each, which I think succeeded if an idiot like me understands the core rules after reading through them once. The rules, lore, resources and everything you need to play is available for free online. Imagine that. Also, it's explicitly stated that conversions and proxy models are encouraged as long as you stick to the correct base sizes. Like I mentioned earlier, they even provide weapons and gear packs to help with customizations. I got rid of the hose the gas mask was attached to and added a few customizations. I wanted to do a few versions of these, basically giving each trooper a custom gas mask, and I also wanted to do 1 or 2 versions including the hoses, but I would do these completely from scratch too, but more on that in a bit. After I got rid of the rest of the shoulder armor, I thought about what to do with the banner. I was sifting through all kinds of Games Workshop sprues that either had ecclesiarchic or heretic elements, and I found this shape from the Inquisition Kill team to be a perfect fit for a blasphemous symbol. So I simply snipped off the small shrine at the top of the banner and pinned the new symbol in there. Then I quickly redid the belt around the armor, again an element I took directly from the artwork, and then finally glued the banner to the rest of the mini, so I could add the final detail. Mike Francina's Legionaire has some tattered cloth draped around his shoulders, and I wanted to do this element on all of my conversions to give them a coherent feeling, as they're all looking a bit different, as you will see here in a bit, and I think that element draws them together. So I rolled out a sheet of clay and cut it into a triangular shape, so technically I could just slap this on and drape it exactly the way it looks in the artwork, but unfortunately the banner was in the way and I had to rethink my approach. So instead I took a smaller sheet of clay and created half of the front part, adding some wear and the larger folds, and then I took the rest of the sheet, made sure I had the shape cut out exactly the way I wanted it to look in the front, and then wrapped the rest around the shoulder and back. Now, because this was free hanging, I could not drag a sharp tool across it to cut away excess, but instead I used these extra sharp nippers, kind of like scissors, to cut away the excess portions of clay, and then built a few folds where the sheet was draped around the shoulders, and also added folds to the part covering the back. I really like how this turned out. I think the triangular shape with the hanging part in the front really emphasizes the sharp angles and shapes. It's framed by the banner, but also that part of battlefield rubble and barbed wire on the other side. And the way the arm points outwards, as well as the small step piece taking away from the angle of the banner, this would even make for a great display model, I think. Okay, my second guy would be based on the veteran guardsman from the Krieg box. He already had a breastplate I could work with, and the off-center stance opened up a lot of possibilities for dynamic posing. I got rid of the wings on the plate, obviously, and made sure the angle was sharp. And then I also gave it the circular weathering I used on the banner, drilling small circular holes into the armor, starting with the large ones and then stacking smaller ones on top, using smaller and smaller drill bits. And now you might have wondered why I don't put these into a handle, and the answer is simple. This way I have better flexibility, I can angle and move the drill bits better, and I have more control over how much I drill away. And you can see that I'm fading out the corrosion and add smaller and more spaced out holes, and I also add small indents further up. Again, I cut down the cloak and reshaped the legs with a knife. I wanted this guy to have a gas mask with a hose, but the one it came with was just too tailored to the monopose sculpt, so I cut it off and shaped the gas mask a bit more to my liking. And then I added small holes with different drill sizes that I could later fill with putty and shape it to look more like the gas mask from the artwork, with all these extra details and outlets. And I think that makes them look a bit more menacing. I took this arm from the Heretic Guardsman sprue because I thought maybe it can hold a rifle a little more loosely, which would fit the stance that looked like he was doing a sidestep in the middle of a fight. And I chose this rifle in case that wouldn't work, and I'd have to go for a slung over the shoulder look instead. And while I was dry fitting the rifle, again I realized that these were massively out of scale and I did everything I could to slim them down. I also hollowed out the stock to make it look lighter and more true to the artwork. I pinned the head in an appropriate height because I got rid of the collar part and then again checked my arm options. Once I decided on what to use, I trimmed down the armor again and cut the folds on the arms into shape and then added a close combat weapon. And next up I bulked out the breeches again, making sure they have some sharp angles and folds, and I did the same for the arms. I'm just a sucker for these boisterous uniforms because of the possibilities for defined, sharp folds they offer. That later makes for some great contrast when you're painting them. And compared to the size of the pants and the armor, the little bit of jacket peeking out below the armor looked a bit small, so I also bulked that out and defined it with a sharp tool and then gradually built the toque under the helmet. Again, that's something very reminiscent of German World War II attire against the cold. After building all the volumes and shapes on that, I put small blobs of clay into the holes I drilled on the gas mask and pushed a piece of wire in that I sanded smooth to create a center hole and make it look like extra plugs. I don't know why, but for some reason instead of rolling a sheet, I gradually built the cloth scarf on this one piece by piece. I guess my sculptor brain just took over because this is how you would do it on master sculpts meant for production, because you wouldn't want any undercuts or air bubbles trapped in. You see, under the arm I also filled that space in, so I have a solid underground I could later press additional clay on top once it's cured. Completely meaningless for any hobbyist, I guess, and especially in the age of digital sculpting, but hey, now you can say you learned something new today. I took the sheet of plastic I cut off from the banner and snipped off a tiny part to create that icon plate on the chest from the artwork. And I cut it down to an appropriate size and used a tiny ball of putty to stick it to the body. I still needed to add the rifle somehow, because you can upgrade these basic troopers from purely melee to having a ranged attack too by just paying 40 points instead of 30. So for gaming purposes, I wanted all of mine to clearly have rifles of some sort. But when I dry fitted this one, I realized that the strap just doesn't conform all too well. So my genius brain thought I could just heat the plastic by holding it near a flame. And oh god, I said near a flame, not right into the raging fires of hell. Anyway, this melted the strap a little too much and I thought I was fucked. But ironically, this fit pretty well because I could shape the now melted to a black goo strap by pulling it against the shape of the shoulder. Maybe I'm a genius after all. For the rest of the cloak, I did use a sheet to save some time, and I just pressed it down onto the putty I put between the arms, added some structure and made it shorter in the back. Since I wanted to add a hose to this gas mask, I also needed some sort of container, like in the artwork. So I used one of these grenades, cleaned it and cut it shorter. Initially, I was not a fan of these rollers when they came out. I thought they were silly and useless, but here I was in dire need of a hose that I could bend exactly the way I needed it. So all of a sudden, it was a very appealing tool to have. It takes a bit of experimenting, like how long and thick the sausage you put in has to be to give the best result. I just knew the medium roller did not produce something that was small enough, so I switched to the small one. And that turned out nice, and if you wonder why I rolled the sausage so it becomes slimmer towards the ends, that's because I wanted some part that I could stick right into the holes I drilled in the gas mask and the container. One thing that irked me a little was right out of the roller these ridges looked tiny, and I guess this looks like a bendy hose looks in real life if you scale it down, but I still wanted them to be a little less protruding and also thicker. I wanted the hose to look a little sturdier and less flimsy, I guess. So I rolled this on a hard surface to flatten it a bit, and yeah, I think this looks a lot better. I cut the length shorter because I just needed it to go behind the scarf and then fiddled around with it until I was happy with the flow. Then I carved a spot for the container on the back and also a hole the hose could fit into. I glued down the container, cut the hose shorter and stuffed it into the hole. Then I only had to bend it into a credible shape. I just had to sculpt some sort of clamp where the hose connected to the gas mask and then built a heretic symbol on the plate in the front. Not that I can read it, but I'm sure it's so heretic it would open the portal of hell right here in my basement if I knew how to pronounce it. I absolutely wanted to use this medic guy because I think he looks twisted enough to fit right into the Trench Crusade world as is. All these blood samples he's carrying, maybe they're going to be used for some occult rituals. I think it adds some nice narrative to these troops, throwing a curveball by having one of them look completely different. Instead of just being cookie cutter soldiers that look a little mean, I want at least one of them to appear really twisted, because think of it, hell opens up and all of a sudden spews out hordes of demons. What kind of person does it take to go, yeah, you know, I'm gonna join these guys? They're just people but have seen the gates of hell and did not combust into ash looking at them, which means they're truly evil in their hearts. So maybe they also have a few perverted hobbies, and I'm trying to find a few ways to reflect that. Once all the detail was gone from the chest area, I used what I think is some form of shoulder armor from the Chaos Cultist sprue and reused it as a chest plate instead. I glued it right on and checked how the rack would look in combination, and I realized the strap would have to go, but that's okay. I wanted to use the head without a helmet because I think it makes him look extra crazy for some reason. However, I did take the helmet he had hanging from his backpack and glued it to his side where space was reserved for some syringes and other tidbits, and it fit right in there. I decided to keep the long cloak this time because, again, all of these elements just make this guy stand out, and maybe he was some kind of surgeon in the life before he joined the forces of hell. I built up the rest of what would become a chest plate with spikes around the shoulder armor. Again, I tried to stick to similar shapes the armor from the artwork had and the ones I gave the other two used. So that meant bulky plates with that distinct lower area angled aggressively and bending upwards. As always, I cut down the unnecessary parts around the arms, and I also cut down the rifle again as much as possible and then glued both arms on. I built the shoulder cloth in the usual way, just had to get a little creative here, adding a large sheet in the back and cutting it down, and then using a smaller sheet in the front that would fit under the gas mask and between the crest of the armor. In the back, I made sure that the rack it was covering showed through the cloth, and that would be a neat little detail later when painting it. I built the fourth guy from the Special Weapons Guardsman from the Krieg box. I really like the slightly hunched pose, the determination in his eyes, if only you could see his eyes below that mask, and walking forward without any silly run. For some reason, this box really stands out when it comes to poses. The good thing about this sculpt is that he already has armor built in that I could use without a lot of resculpting. And it is heavy armor too, with that additional plates and the shin guards, which already makes him look different enough to the other guys. It was a little more effort to get rid of the cloak and to resculpt the bandages on the feet this time, because the cloak wasn't as loosely connected. But after a few hours, we got there. Yeah, this kind of made me question my life choices. Like I said, this is the kind of pose that can represent anything. Like just dry fitting that arm carrying the shells. I believe it. But the real reason I tried on this arm was that I wanted him to carry a sword that would point forward, but not in a cheesy, charge way, but more like a seasoned swordsman walking towards his next opponent. I chose this sword from the command squad sprue, but I wanted it to look a little more gritty, so I started hacking into it with a knife to make it look ancient. Again, in hindsight, if I knew about the accessory pack, I would have chosen a more exotic weapon, but maybe I'll change it before I start painting these. The armor had a more square shape to it, so I carved it a little rounder, which in my opinion is a better fit, and I also cut down the plate dangling from it into a simpler rectangle. Somehow I doubt hell would care about perfect angles. As I glued the arm and the sword to the body, I hope you see what I mentioned earlier with the sword fighter pose and how the overall sculpt is suited for so many different stances. And once I glued the head on, I got the feeling of, yep, that's it. This is just the drama I'm looking for in my custom builds. I was complaining a lot about weapons and their scale, so for this one I picked this arm holding a shotgun from the Trader Guardsman. So it's not like Games Workshop can't do it, but I think they're boxed in with these oversized weapons because they always did it that way. To tie the armor into the world, I added the corrosion again in the usual way. And then I checked if the shotgun arm would fit, and I liked how it contributed to the pose, so I glued it on right away. And still having a few gaps to fill, but that would be the main elements done. I sandpapered off the skull mask as I thought it would be a little bit too cheesy for the Trench Crusade setting. The forces of hell don't care about theatrics like that, or maybe they do, but in my headcanon, these guys prefer a bit more of a no-nonsense approach. I thought this one would benefit again from some hose action, so I rolled another one, glued it into the mask and pushed it around a bit until I was happy. After connecting the hose with a container on the back and adding a few more details to the mask, I thought right now would be the time to do the bases. So I added a few resin pieces by Epic Basing and some bones I got from Crowd Cover and drenched it in super glue and earth for my yard. Very trenchy. While doing the last poncho, I started to think about how I would paint these, and I had a really clear picture in mind, but I really ran out of time. I knew that the video at this point would already take more than a week, including the editing, and I really want to start putting out more YouTube content again. So I decided not to paint these in this video, but to do it in a separate one. And I don't know about you as you watch this, but I had a lot of fun creating these, and I'm truly proud of taking a first step into a rather unique Heretic Legion warband that will be lots of fun to play with. So if you are into Trench Crusade, why not hit that subscribe button, because there'll be definitely a lot more of it coming on this channel. I love the setting of Trench Crusade. As someone said, there is a finite number of artillery shells that will kill Satan, and by God, we will find that number. And I think this sums up the scenario pretty well. Divine forces and demonic sorcery clashing with technology and steel. A techno laboratory is by the church, creating soldiers capable of hearing the word of God. Witches materialize bombs crafted in hell. And yet the bolt action rifle is the workhorse of the battlefield. And both faithful foot soldiers and heretic legionnaires carry it. Trench Crusade is at its core a skirmish game. Humans fighting humans, but there's also super soldiers fused with armor and weaponry forged in the fires of hell, or empowered by the cloned flesh of the Son of God. Yeah, you better believe it. They already kind of promised tanks, they sure are in the lore, but it doesn't stop there. Blind snipers who gouge their own eyes out, hit their targets guided only by their faith in God. And even angels and demons duke it out in and above the trenches. I just like how all of this madness ramps up gradually, and I'm looking forward to what else is to come for Trench Crusade. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you want to dive deeper into kit bashing and conversion, I have the perfect video for you on screen right now. Keep pushing that clay, and I'll see you in the next one.